Good afternoon and welcome to another session of Football Fitness with Totalsports. My name is Rodet Yila and I'm a biokineticist at the High Performance Center of the Sports Science Institute of South Africa. So in this 45-minute exercise session, we're looking to help footballers improve their performance by hopefully reducing or mitigating their risk of injury, which in turn will allow you to stay on the field for longer, therefore improve your performance. However, these exercises are not limited to footballers only, because any running-based team sport athlete would be able to benefit from these exercises. So your rugby players, hockey players, basketballers and netballers would also be able to benefit from these, because it is all about stabilizing your pelvic region, improving the strength in your knees and helping with your balance and proprioception of the ankles. To get started, as always, I need to remind you that if you ever feel pain during any of the exercises, it's better to stop the exercise there rather than trying to push through the pain. If you are aware of any shoulder, low back, knee or ankle niggles, please make sure that you follow the instructions and the prescribed exercises given to you by your physiotherapist or your biokineticist. It's always better to make sure that we're doing the movement with proper form and technique rather than rushing through the exercise or compensating because the movement is either too difficult or we don't have enough strength to complete the movement accordingly. What we'll need for this session is a weighted object. So I'll be using a weighted backpack. The weight of the object is relevant to your strength level. So if you are relatively new to strength exercises, keep the weight light, make sure that you perform the movements correctly and then start increasing your weight afterwards. And if you are quite competent with your strength exercises, feel free to go a little bit heavier. And by heavier, I mean something that is relevant to your strength. And in terms of numbers, you can look at something between a 15 kg or 20 kg load. So with my backpack, I've just set it up to be somewhere between 15 and 20 kgs so that we can get through the exercises with some form of resistance. But remember, you don't want to overload your backpack or if it's another type of bag and then you aren't able to complete the exercises correctly. You also need a form of exercise mat or even a large towel just to provide some cushioning for the ground. You'll need a raised platform, something that's not too high, but it needs to be stable so that you can support a bit of your body weight. We won't be standing on it, but we will be putting some of our body weight through the object. So it just needs to be stable so it doesn't collapse. And then your optional extras are your sweat towel and water bottle. It's advised that you keep a water bottle nearby so that you can quickly grab a sip of water rather than rushing over to the tap. But if that's not an option, rather have a glass available somewhere nearby. So to get started, we're going to go into a little bit of a warm-up. To warm up, we'll start off with skipping. If you don't have skipping ropes nearby, what you can just do is hop on the spot and pretend that you have skipping ropes in your hands. So as I'll be doing, we're going to skip on the spot just to increase our body temperature, get our breathing rate up, as well as our heart rate. So this is the second session of the Football Fitness with Totalsports. For those of you who joined last week, what we're doing in this session is a slight progression of what we did last week. And for those of you who didn't do last week, you'll be starting off with this session and you can feel free to have a look at what last week's session was all about. And then the better you get at the movements, the easier the sessions will become. We've got another 30 seconds to go. Almost there. Good, and you can relax. So, next up we'll go into a little bit of jogging. We'll jog around on the spot. If you want, you can jog around the area that you'll be exercising, but please don't stray too far, otherwise you won't be able to hear when we move on to the next bit. So, starting off with the jog, it's nice and easy, getting your hands and feet moving. From there, we'll lift up at the back, so we'll go into butt kicks. So this will just help to get your knee flexors or your hamstring muscles a little bit more warmed up. And from there, transition into high knees. So here, we'll get the hip flexors and your quadriceps warmed up. Good. You can relax. So, we'll finish up with a couple of dynamic stretches and some movements. So, starting off at the side, we will go into a hamstring scoop where we're lifting the toe of the leg that goes forward. You can slightly bend the back knee and reach for the ground with both hands. Shuffle your feet to change over, and we'll complete 2 per side. And then if you run out of space, we'll just turn around. For those of you who have a little bit more space, you'll continue all the way through. So that totals 4 per side. Next up, we'll be doing close-up squats where we're moving from side to side. The idea is to keep your chest open, you pull your shoulders back, and you try to drop your hips as far backwards as possible. We'll go into 5 per side here. Here we go. So, wrapping up, we've got leg swings. If you need help with balance, you can always hold onto the wall or a couch that's nearby. If you don't need help with balance, you can always use your hands for a counter movement. So, swinging your legs for 10 repetitions, as high up in front of you and as far back behind you as possible. We'll change over to the other side, and then we'll go into our activation exercises. Good. So that's the first bit done of the warm-up. We'll move into the next part of the warm-up, which is the activation bit. So what we'll do is a knee hug into a lunge, and then we'll rotate from there. So we can stand with enough space in front of us to perform the knee hug and lunge. You can lift your hands up if you want, and then from there you're holding onto the front knee so that you can rotate your chest. You'll do 5 per side and then change over to the other side. So you'll notice that I'm keeping my shoulders and hips in line. As you get all the way forward, you don't want to arch your back to get your hips forward. So that's 3. I've got 2 more on this side. That's 5. This is number 4. So there will be 1 more. Good. Next up, we'll go into hands and knees. You can use your exercise mat or your towel just for a little bit of cushioning for your knees. The idea will be to place your knees directly underneath your hips. You space them hip width apart, and then your hands directly underneath your shoulders, spaced shoulder width apart. From here, we're going to lift the toes up if you are able to go into the progressed version. So this will be your 2-point position. Otherwise, you can keep your toes down if you are still looking at your beginner to intermediate version, still focusing on controlling your balance. So the easy version, or the beginner and intermediate version, would be to keep your toes down. You push your hand forward as far as possible, while your opposite heel is pushed back as far as possible. There should be a nice straight line through your body, and then you change over to the other side. So ideally, we're reaching as far forward as we can with our hands, and then as far back with our heel. If you can do the advanced version, lifting the toes, and then you're driving through, maintaining balance, and then switching over. So the idea is to hold for at least 2 seconds at the end, and then change over. You want to go through 5 per side. Please make sure that you don't allow your belly button to sink towards the ground. That will cause your hips to arch like that, so you're actually dropping and causing your lumbar or your lower back to rotate forward. So it's going to make a nice dip there. So keeping everything stable, you'll go for 5 per side. Remember, the advanced version is with toes up. And then your beginner and intermediate version with toes down. Good. So I've done a combination of the 2 options, and that would be my 5 per side. Next up, to finish our activation bit, we're going into a single leg toe touch that will have a leg swing. So the important part here is to focus on balance, and if you can, the leg swing will be a rapid movement. Don't try to rush through the movement if you can't stabilize and balance. So starting on one leg, the other leg is hanging. If I'm standing on my left leg, I'll use my right hand to touch the toes, so you're pushing your hips backwards as you slowly touch the toes. Once I've touched, it's quickly swinging up, and then the idea is to keep your hips level. You don't want to fall over needing to touch the ground with the other foot. So you'll do 5 per side. The first movement is slow, the second movement is fast. So opposite side, slowly touch, and then quickly up. Try kill the movement, or you stop the movement as quickly as possible, and then you go into the next one. Right, going into the other side. Once again, opposite side, so right foot with left hand. Please make sure that you're driving your hips forward by squeezing your glutes, using your hamstrings to stand up. And that's 5. Good. So, activation bit done. We'll go into a little bit of mobility. So for the mobility part, we're just looking to get into our end ranges. Starting off on our exercise mat, we're going to go into a downward dog position. So if we go from a high plank position like that, where you've got your feet near or narrow stance and hands shoulder width apart, we push our hips as far back as possible as we drop our chest low. From there, you stride forward with one foot, trying to reach as close to your hand as possible, and from there you'll go into the elbow grounding of the same side that your foot is. So right foot, right elbow into left elbow. Once you've done both, you'll go into your next downward dog, and then once again, right foot, right elbow, and then your left elbow. In that position, you should feel that your groins or your adductors are being stretched a little bit more. So it's a nice hip complex exercise. 5 per side, and then we'll go into our next one. So I've got one more to go. Okay, so for our next mobility exercise, it's going to involve a little bit of rotation. So there will be a coordination and balance component to it. So the slower, the better. And obviously, if you can maintain a hold at the end, that will be first prize. So we're looking to go into a tiger sit-out, also known as a break dancer, where we start off on hands and knees. From here, lift your knees off the ground, keeping your back straight, so it's a nice flat back. From here, using your opposite hand and feet, we're going to lift the opposite side, so right hand, left foot, rotate, and get our hips up. So what you're doing is you're actually stabilizing on opposite limbs, and then you rotate towards the other side. That would be 1 per side, and we need to complete 5. If you feel that your mat or your towel is causing you to slide around or actually causing you to grip a little bit too much, making it more difficult, feel free to pop over to the carpet next to you, and then you'll be able to perform a little bit smoother. So 5 per side over there, and always moving in a slow and controlled movement, stabilize, and then rolling over to the other side. So you'll see that that standing foot is actually flat. I'm not staying on my toes. And you're always keeping the same distance between your hands and your knees to make sure that you are stable. I've got 1 more per side. Right, my last one. Good. Final exercise for our mobility bit will be the Y-ups. So what we're looking to do is actually get our posterior chain, so that's everything that's behind us, involved. If you can, you'll stand in front of a wall, otherwise a door. Please make sure no one's walking through that door, otherwise you might bump into them. But all you need is something behind you so that you can use something to give you a bit of feedback for your hips. So if you're standing flat up against the wall, take half a step forward. That gives you a little bit of distance behind you and the wall. And then our feet will be shoulder width apart. From here, having the toes pointing forward, we'll push our hips back, and then you make contact with the object that's behind you. So if it's a wall or a door, just make contact with your glutes, so your bum must touch. Allow your hands to hang, pointing your thumbs upwards, and reach as low down as possible. In that position, you should feel that there's a little bit of tension in the hamstrings. Please make sure that the shoulders are pulled back so that your back stays straight. And then I'm going to lift my thumbs up as high as possible. They can go wide, so you've got a wider reach. Lock your elbows in place, pull your shoulders back. From there, drive your hips forward to stand, and you'll see the shape that you formed with your arms will look like a Y. So that's why it's called a Y up. So hinging back with your hips, drop your hands down, lift your arms as high as possible, and then push your hips forward. To show you what that looks like from the side, as I hinge my hips backwards, keeping the shoulders pulled back, you'll see it's a nice straight back, tension in the hamstrings, lifting the hands up, and from there, push your hips forward to stand up. So you need to do 5 of those, and then we'll be able to get into the tougher bit of the session, which will be our first stability bit. All of this is necessary to make sure that our joints and our muscles have been prepared for what's to come. Right, so that is my 5. Once you finish with that, you can have a quick drink of water, and then we'll get started with our stability component. Right, so for the stability component, we're going to start off with the first exercise, which will require our raised platform. The idea is that you should be able to put some body weight on it. We're not going to be sitting completely onto it, so if it isn't too stable, the only issue will be if it does collapse, but it doesn't need to be able to hold all of your body weight. You can also just make contact with it and then stand straight away. You don't have to completely rest on it. What you want to do is essentially have a seat, place one foot in the middle so that it will help center your balance. And from there, the idea is to stand up and then sit down only using one leg. The other leg is directly in front of you, so it actually helps to counterbalance so that when I'm pushing through my heel, I can keep my hands straight and I stand up in one movement. The emphasis will be on keeping your hips level and keeping your knee in line with our toes. So remember the important rule, it's not about how you're squatting, it's about keeping your knee in front of the toes. So you don't have to squat with your toes only pointed forward. We can squat with our toes pointed outwards, but the knee stays in line with the toes. For this exercise, we don't want to start with the toes pointing outwards because we don't want our knee to follow that line. We want our knee to follow the straight line that's in front of us. So you'll do 5 per side, starting in a seated position, center your leg, other leg to counterbalance, and you're not using your hands to throw forward, helping you. Everything stays in front, and straight movement up, and then slowly sitting back down. If you can, you just touch and then you stand up again, rather than completely resting. So this will be the first exercise of 3. We need to do 5 per leg. Starting seated, leg out, and you control. So remember, you don't want this knee collapsing inwards either. Nice and slow movement. You touch at the bottom, and you stand again. So that's 5, relatively quick and easy. Please make sure that you are following the movements that you can perform. Don't rush ahead because you see that I'm performing it at a certain speed. If you are performing it faster than me, that's good. Just make sure you are controlling. And if you're performing it slower than me, don't worry, you will get better over time. Alright, so next up, we need to grab our weighted object and we'll head over to the mat. From here, we'll be doing weighted Russian twists. So the idea will be to sit at an angle so that you do feel your abdominals are engaged, but the importance will be around your pelvic stabilizers or your core stabilizers to make sure that our lower body movements are separated from our upper body movements. The easiest version for beginners will be with both feet down. Our intermediate would be the medium version, which will have 1 foot up, 1 foot down, and then your advanced or most difficult version will be both feet up. The importance, however, will be around whether you can lift the object over from one side to the other without moving your legs around. So the legs need to be shut off and completely still, and you need to move the object around 5 times per side. So choose between your 3 scaled versions and then make sure that you're controlling the movement all the way throughout. So to start off, I'll go through with both feet up. So it's shoulders moving from side to side so that you can actually see the chest does rotate. You do touch the ground and it's controlled. So there we go, that's 5. Our next version, we'll be going into a Nordic quadricep lean with a press. So starting off on your knees, we'll have our feet in that bent position with our ankles so that our toes are down. If you do prefer to have your feet flatter, please make sure that you've put something underneath your ankle so that you can actually keep it in a more locked position rather than a flat position. I would typically use a foam roller, so something with that type of height. You can also use a firm pillow or cushion if you don't have a foam roller. So locking your ankles in that place, you will need to keep your weighted object nearby. So the idea will be to recline as far backwards as possible. This is why you need to make sure that you've got your ankles locked. All of your weight is now at the back. your quadriceps are taking the strain. So you need to make sure that your glutes are also being squeezed so that you protect your lower back. And in this position, you will perform your press with your weighted object. Make sure that your shoulders, hips, and knees stay in one line, and it's a controlled movement as far back as possible. Once you get to the end, you perform your slow press, and then you push through your legs to get your hips forward. So starting off, we're going to allow our hips to rock backwards, keeping a nice straight line. Get to the end, you press, and you drive forward. So always make sure you're squeezing your glutes to help protect your lower back. You press and drive forward. So you're almost trying to push into your ankles. That will allow you to drive your legs forward. One more. Right. So those are the 3 exercises. We've done 1 set of each. We need to complete another 2 sets to make up our 3 sets. If you did feel that it was quite easy, please continue in your own time. I'll be going through them just as I did before, adding some cues here and there to try and make it a little bit easier for those who struggle a little bit. Once you finish all 3 sets, you can have a water break, and then we'll go into our final component. So for those who struggled with the single leg sit to stands, what we're going to do is we're actually going to start off with 2 feet. You can spread them shoulder width apart. You're going to stand up with 2 feet and sit down with 1 foot. So if you felt that your single leg sit to stand was a little bit too difficult on the way up, we're just going to go into 2 feet. We stand up from there, rearrange our foot position, and then slowly control back down. All the way to the ground or to our seated position, 2 feet, and then slowly going back down. The very important part is that your knee doesn't collapse inwards, so there's no movement of the knee like that when you're sitting down. And when you finally go back to your single leg version, once again, you don't want your knee collapsing inwards when you're standing up. So this will be number 4. I've got 1 more on this side. Yeah, so going over to the other side now. So you should feel that you are using your legs to stand up and sit down. You're not using your hands or throwing your hands forward to get more momentum to stand up. So that's number 5. Going into our next one, which is the weighted Russian twist. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this foam roller as is because I'll still need it. So I'm actually just going to move over because we'll be doing the intermediate version, which will have 1 foot up, 1 foot down, and you're rotating as far as possible. So that is our 5 per side for your weighted Russian twist. Going into your Nordic leans with your press, and this is the Nordic quadricep leans. We'll go without the weighted object, but we'll still move our arms. So once again, the easier version is just to focus on what's happening here at the hips. We're just moving our arms as if we were pressing so that you can get used to that. And then hopefully for your 3rd set, you are able to perform with the press. So that stretch in this area here by your hips is very nice for those who have tight hip flexors, or you always feel that this area seems locked up. You can actually feel that in this position you're actually using your muscles to control that recline. So that's 2 sets down, 1 set to go. If possible, you try your hand at the advanced version, so not the modified versions, And if you still require a little bit of help, please take your time to learn the control of the movement, and then you'll progress. So you just revisit the modified versions we did now. Okay, so I'll start off with, once again, the single leg sit to stands. So I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable now. I've got my single leg there. I perform my stand and the sit both with one leg. And you should feel that it's more about control of your hip and knees rather than the speed of the movement. And that's 5. Switching over to the other side. That's 5. Going into our Russian twist, so because I haven't done the version with both feet down yet, that's the one that I'll do. So just in case you did struggle, we'll go both feet down, nice and slow, rotating side to side. And that's 5. So for our last set, we will grab our weighted object again. For those of you who have now finished, please have a bit of a water break as we wrap up. This is the last one. Right, so that's 3 sets of the 3 exercises. Have a water break, and then we'll get stuck into our last component, which is the strength component. So for the last bit, we'll start off with our weighted object. The idea is to perform a Cossack squat, where we are dropping our hips to the side like we did in the warm-up, and then as you're standing up, you're driving your weighted object upwards. So you're going to lock your object at your side, make sure that everything is firm here so you're not automatically sinking towards that weighted side. You actually need to stabilize around your trunk and pelvic region. Drop your hips as far back as possible, and as you stand, you perform the press. That will be done 5 times per side. Please make sure your hips drop as far backwards as possible without losing balance. So we'll finish off one side at a time. That's 5. Good, so that's 5 for the Cossack squats. Going into the next one, we need our raised platform. You can place it directly in front of your exercise mat or your towel, and then what you'll do is you'll lay down so that your hips, knees and ankles are all at 90 degrees. From here, what you'll do is you'll start off with one leg at a time, so your feet will be shoulder width apart, but you're starting off one leg at a time. We do 5 repetitions on one leg, go over to 5 repetitions on the other leg, and then we're going to 5 repetitions with both legs. So the reason we finish on 2 legs is because you'll be tired in your hamstrings and glutes by the time you get to the third one. So we don't want to start off with 2 legs and then make it more and more difficult as we continue. The important part is to make sure you're driving through your glutes, using your hamstrings to lift your hips up. You're not arching your back to flare your ribs upwards to make it seem like you're lifting your hips up. Always push downwards into the object, don't push the object away, otherwise it might slide or collapse. So starting off with one leg, what you want to try to do is focus on keeping your knees level, so you're not actually swinging this leg for momentum, and your toes always point directly upwards, following the same line as your knee. You don't allow your toes to drop outwards, pointing towards the wall. So starting off, one leg, you're lifting up and down for 5 reps. Switching over to the other side. And then both feet. So that will be your glutes and hamstrings complex, where you're doing 5 reps of each. If you did struggle with the single leg options there, what you'll do is you'll do 10 to 15 repetitions with both legs. The reason I say 10 to 15 is because you might still find that going to 15 reps with 2 legs is quite tough. So 10 to 15 reps with 2 legs if you did struggle going 5 on the one side and then 5 on the other side. Our third exercise for the strength block would be a single leg deadlift with a row. So what we'll do is we'll hold our weighted object at your hip line. So essentially just straighten your arms, lock your shoulders back. We start off on one leg and we push our hips backwards as we lower the object towards the ground. The object does not need to touch the ground, but you want to go as far down as possible. You'll feel that there's a lot of tension being built up in your posterior chain, so that would be your calves, your hamstrings and your glutes, as well as your lower back. When you're standing, make sure you're driving your hips forward to stand to make sure that you're not overloading your lower back. If you think back to how we performed the Y-ups, so it involved your hips moving backwards and then upwards, that is the movement pattern that we want. If you do struggle with balance, feel free to keep your toes down. You're not allowed to push off that back leg, it's just to help with balance. So it's one leg down. When you get to the bottom, you row and then you stand up. You need to perform 5 per side. Good, so that's my 5, switching over to the other side. And there's one more. Okay, so that is the first set of each. We've got another 2 sets to go. Once again, if you felt comfortable, you can continue in your own time. If you still want a little bit of help, you'll move at my speed, where I add a couple of more cues. Starting off with your Cossack squats, what we're going to do here is we're only performing the Cossack squat with a weighted object. There's no press. So we drop off to the side as far back as possible and stand up. So all we're doing here is focusing on your pelvic stability and driving upwards by pushing the ground away from you to make sure that you pop up. So there's one more. Good, switching over. And that's 5. Going into the next one, which is your glutes hamstring bridge complex. What I'll do is I'll do the option with one leg, the other leg, and then 2 legs, because we have demonstrated how to do 2 legs already.
So if you did struggle, just start off with 2 legs and do your 10 to 15 repetitions, making sure that you perform the movements by using the correct muscle groups.
Moving into exercise 3. For this one, our modified version will be keeping your toes down. So remember, it's not about pushing off into the back foot, it's just keeping your toes down to help with balance. And we're still hinging at our hips. We still perform the row, and then we drive the hips forward. So you've got as little weight in that back foot as possible. All you're doing is using it to help with balance and giving you an idea of whether your hips are moving backwards or not. It should also help keep your hips level. Good, so we've done 2 sets of the required 3. The final set we'll go into the normal version, or the version which I initially demonstrated, and we'll see if you can manage with that now that we've performed your cues. So starting off with the Cossack squat, I goes into the press. Last one, and switching over. Nice. Once again, your glutes hamstring bridge complex. If you did feel you're able to control with one leg, you can give it a try, but just remember you are going to be more fatigued now because we're a little bit deeper into the exercise session. Okay, and to wrap it up, the last exercise of the strength block will be your single leg deadlifts with the rows. So once again, you're going to try going on to one leg only. You perform your row and drive your hips forward. That's number 3. I've got 2 more to go. And the final push. Well done. Good, so that's the end of the strength block, and with that, it's the end of the session. We'll wrap up with a little bit of a stretch. So we'll use our mat or the towel. We'll go into a half kneeling position with our knee directly underneath our hips and shoulder, the other leg in front and also flexed at 90 degrees. From here, I'm going to squeeze the glutes at the back to get our hip flexor stretched a little bit more, and then the same hand as the knee, we'll lift that up, reaching as high as possible. You should feel a nice stretch in the lats all the way down into the hip flexors. you want, you can keep your water bottle nearby, have a sip as we go. Staying in a similar position, just dropping the hips backwards all the way to straighten the leg. Your opposite hand will reach over to either the toes, or if you only reach the shins, that's fine. You'll feel a stretch along the back of your thigh regardless. Good. From there, we're going to drop our hips backwards as we place our leg out on the side. Lower your elbows to the ground, and then if you can, you reach through the keyhole to drop your shoulder towards the ground. Bring in the hips forward to allow your leg to swing around the back. Then drop in your hips backwards and reaching through the other keyhole. Good, so we'll change over, going into the same half kneeling position, knee directly underneath your hips. Squeeze the glutes as you lift your hand as high as possible. Hinging your hips all the way back, reaching with your other hand. Dropping your hips backwards as you place your foot out to the side. If you can, you go through the keyhole. And the last bit, bring your hips forward to drop your leg around the back, and then through the keyhole once again. Well done. So that was another 45-minute exercise session where we focused on exercises that would help your footballer. However, like I said, they're not limited to football. Any running-based field sport athlete would benefit from the exercise. So if you play hockey, rugby, basketball, or netball, these exercises should help with your reduction of injury risk, and thereby it should allow you to stay on the field for longer to improve your performance. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to check out what we did in last week's exercise session so that you can get a better idea of how to perform some of the movements. And we'll see you same time, same place next week, Friday. I hope that you guys have a good start to your weekend and stay safe. Cheers.